Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Elections Weekly. We took a couple of weeks off for various reasons, but we're back this week, and it's been an eventful news week. We have a lot of stuff to go over, so we're really excited to bring this podcast to you. So I guess I'll go ahead and throw it right to the panelists. I am your host, Eric Cunningham, and with me we have Joe Szymanski and Dylan Wade. Both of them are contributors for Elections Daily. Joe is the head of our elections team. We've had a pretty eventful cycle in the last few days. We've had allegations of a woke Republican in Alabama. We've had a surprise resignation from Congress in Texas. We had the death of Don Young in Alaska. And we've also had a bunch of other things we're going to go over. So we'll go ahead and start, I think, with today's news, which has been somewhat surprising. Palin Vela in Texas's 34th congressional district, the incumbent there, had been announcing his retirement at the start of the cycle. Pretty typical of politicians. He'd been redistricted actually from a Biden +4 seat into a Biden +15 seat, so a little bit safer. He chose to retire. Vicente Gonzalez, the representative for the 15th district, is moving over into this district to presumably replace him. And it was just expected that would be the way it is. Surprisingly, though, Vela has announced that he will resign from Congress within the next month or so. This has kind of come out of left field. No one was expecting this. He's taking a private sector job, which is a little bit iffy for a bunch of reasons for an incumbent congressman. But basically what that means is that after he resigns, within a certain period of time, there will be a special election. Texas fills their offices. They don't leave them open. And so there will be a special election, a jungle primary, similar to how Texas 6 was run, which means that there will be a large field of candidates. If no one gets over 50% of the vote, then it will go to a runoff. The complication here is that because Vicente Gonzalez is currently a sitting member of Congress in a different congressional district, he can't actually run in this race, which means Republican Mayra Flores, who is the candidate who won 60% of the vote in her primary, the nominee for the new 34th congressional district, she's already out. She's running for this. Will be running in the special election. She will likely not be facing a top-tier Democratic candidate. Any Democrat that wins the seat will only be representing the seat for 5-6 months at most, which is not a job you can get most people to do, and it's not a job most people would accept. So on the baseline level, the seat is a Biden +4 district at the moment using the old configuration. Stretches from Cameron County, I think it has a portion of Hidalgo County, and then goes up into some areas north of Corpus Christi. The new design takes in a lot more Democratic areas of Hidalgo County, all of Cameron County, and then stops up at Kennedy. It doesn't go up into the Corpus Christi area as far, which means that new seat is not as competitive. We have it at likely Democratic. But for this upcoming special election, we have the race at toss-up. I'll go ahead and throw it to Joe here to kind of explain a little bit more of the thought process behind this decision, what we're looking for, and how we'll be covering this race when it happens. We still don't know the primary date, when it will. We'll know the date for the election once Vela resigns from Congress, which will be in a week or two. It won't be. He hasn't resigned immediately. He's just announced preemptively that he will be resigning. So until that happens, we don't actually know that exact time. But I'll throw it to Joe to kind of give a little bit more details here.
Yeah, so obviously we are in for what might be the most interesting special election we have between the 2020 elections and, of course, the upcoming elections in 2022. This is probably likely going to be the most interesting House Representative special we will have. From what we've all been told, a special is going to happen. Most people expect Vela to retire at the very latest by Easter. He gave the date of about a few weeks. That would be about 3 weeks, almost a month from now, until Easter weekend. So I've been told that Vale will probably resign officially by then. That probably means potentially at least the jungle primary in June, and that would then probably lead to a actual runoff probably in August, late July, early August. This is going to be very fascinating to watch. Again, like Eric said, Biden +4 seat. We're rating it toss-up because, we don't necessarily know how the Rio Grande Valley is going to react to this. It's still a very questionable area. Looking over, the results, obviously the swings between this area with the massive Hispanic populations it has was a massive interest from 2020 there are signs that will or at least could continue into 2022. But it's going to be very interesting to see here kind of how this goes, where it kind of goes. Flores obviously will be the Republican nominee here. And I think the interesting thing here is, like Eric mentioned, Democrats are not going to be lining up for the seat. Even if they hold this seat, they're only going to hold it for about 4 to 5 months. Vicente Gonzalez will take over the new version no matter what, which is, in my opinion, why it's going to be why we're waiting is a toss-up right now. It's going to be really hard for me to see right now Democrats to get a truly solid candidate. This is a seat that's going to have a lot of people who are going to want to, potentially vote in a Republican like Flores. It's going to be really fascinating to see. It's going to be very good to get a kind of a baseline look at the Rio Grande Valley a couple months before the election. I think that's what a lot of people are going to be excited about, especially if we get to a runoff point. But again, that's going to be probably maybe the cause of concern here is that, Flores is going to be the only Republican candidate most likely. There likely isn't going to be any strong Democratic candidates. That could lead to some weird things happening. And it could very well lead to Mayra Flores potentially holding the seat for 4 to 5 months for Republicans in a very narrow Congress, but then go on to lose the seat while Republicans may gain the majority in the United States House of Representatives come November 2022.
And here's the seat for those who are interested. This is what it looks like right now. You notice it stretches into some of the southern areas of Hidalgo County along the border, all of Cameron County, and then kind of surgically goes around up through these areas. For those who are saying the seat is a little bit gerrymandered, yes and no. The fajita strip design is pretty intentional. If the seat was actually drawn it basically went straight up to Corpus Christi instead of taking in Hidalgo, it would actually be a lot more competitive than it is right now, probably. You could easily see a seat like that being much more competitive because the Corpus Christi area is a lot more Republican than Hidalgo County, if you were to chop those portions out. Another thing to note here, we are rating this only as a toss-up for now. This obviously could change. We don't know who the Democrats will be interested in doing. This is a jungle primary as well. This could just as easily only have a couple of major candidates and then end in one round. If there's only 3 or 4 candidates and, the majority of them are going towards Flores as the Republican and then a couple of Democrats, it's quite possible someone like Flores could win an outright majority of the vote, or a Democrat if there's only 2 candidates in the race. The runoff only is a factor here if there's a lot of candidates in the race and they're splitting the vote. That's like what we saw in Texas 6 last year, where the largest vote getter only won 19% of the vote. And then the second largest was another Republican who got around 13.5% of the vote. We don't expect that to happen here. As we mentioned earlier, the primaries already happened for the general election in this district under new lines, which means the candidates in that primary have already lost. They may have already closed their campaign accounts. They may have already closed their donations if they had any to begin with. Flores obviously has money right now, not as much as I think as Monica de la Cruz does in the neighboring 15th district, which we have as a leans Republican seat or a likely Republican seat. I'm not sure. It's one of the two. But we're going to be following this one closely because this is so far the best pickup opportunity for Republicans in a special election. We've not actually had a lot of resignations in the House, and we've had basically none in competitive districts. The only, I think, competitive one was the Texas 6 race, which wasn't a Trump plus 3 district and turned into one where Republicans won the popular vote in the runoff in the preliminary one by about 23 points, and then made both of the runoff slots. Also, as I mentioned in my article this morning, I put out in Elections Daily, Biden is not only unpopular nationally, he's very unpopular in Texas. Most polling shows him far more underwater in Texas than nationally. If nationally he's under double digits, in Texas he's down closer to 20 points in the best polls. There's really not a whole lot of positives there on that end. So it'd be kind of relying on low turnout, Democratic ancestry, ancestral Democratic support there in the region and whatnot. What are your thoughts on this situation, Dylan, and how do you kind of see this thing going? Do you think there'd be any, as someone who's just kind of, as a Democrat watching this race, what are you thinking basically about the future of this and what this really means?
I mean, a Biden +4 seat in a wave Republican year, which it's going to be, was never going to be a great seat for Democrats in a special election. I'm confused by Vela not just sticking it out a few months. He was going to leave he was going to be out basically in November anyway. So I don't know why he didn't just stick it out instead of, most congressmen aren't gonna turn an eye at a little insider trading. Just ask Tom Malinowski. So I don't know why he didn't just stick it out. But I mean, I would be very surprised if Democrats managed to win this for all the reasons you said, and just the environment is terrible. Even if Biden weren't 20 points underwater in Texas, even if he were 5 points underwater in Texas, I don't see this being a great seat for Democrats at the moment, especially with no good candidate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's certainly an unusual situation. I think the big wild card here really is the fact that the primaries have already happened, and that the winner of the primary for this seat is already a member of Congress. I can't remember the last time this has happened.
Actually, this is kind of similar to Brenda Lawrence in Michigan.
That's a good point.
She was appointed and then had to run in the special election. I believe she won the special election, but lost the full election for the seat to Rashida Tlaib.
Yeah, and if I recall right, she didn't even show up to Congress. She just chose to, because it was only a couple of weeks. She decided not to go to D.C. and do anything because there's really no reason to bother at that point, right?
Yeah, so not quite the same, but it's the closest I can think of.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That's a pretty good comparison, I would say. That's not the closest. And obviously these opportunities only happen once in a decade with the congressional redistricting. That can happen, on a more local level and state level mid-decade redistricting, which is more common than it used to be, but is still not incredibly common. But yeah, for right now, this race we have it as a toss-up out of an abundance of caution, certainly leaning towards more the lean Republican category. But we can't really say anything for certain because there's been no polling. There's been this literally just happened earlier today.
One would say it's Tiltar.
Yeah. We don't use tilts. No. The tilts are hearsay. We do not use tilts.
Hearsay.
I know. I said it specifically because of that.
Yeah, that's a good way to tilt me. Yeah, but yeah, we'll keep you posted on this as it happens. We don't know who the Democrats will be putting up, if they even put up anyone serious. This does have significant Democratic tendencies down ballot still. Vela won his seat by about 10 points more than Biden won the district. He won by 14 and Biden won by 4. So there was a little bit of an incumbency advantage there. There could also be an incumbency advantage for Flores if she wins. She could go from saying that she's, wanting to be the member of Congress, because she is the member of Congress currently, and maybe that has a little bit of an edge. We still think it should be a significant underdog, just given the baseline partisanship of this seat. This is by far the most Democratic seat in South Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley. Only the El Paso seat is more Democratic in South Texas in its entirety. And that's really more, West Texas. But we'll go into our next topic. The major news that happened this week is Trump rescinding his endorsement in Alabama. To my knowledge, this is the first time Trump has actually withdrawn an endorsement. And he chose to do it for Mo Brooks, who, to the surprise of no one, has been running an incredibly mediocre Senate campaign. This is, of course, if you followed Mo Brooks' career, this should not surprise you. This is someone who won his initial primary against a turncoat Democrat turned Republican, has faced no competition electorally in a Huntsville seat that is absurdly Republican and continues to be very, very Republican, has faced actual primary attempts that have gotten around 20 to 30% of the vote against him, and only got 20% of the vote in a three-way primary where one of the candidates was named Roy Moore. This time, he's seen his initial polling lead implode to the twin candidacies of Katie Britt, former staffer for the retiring Richard Shelby, and then Mike Durant, who was well known as a pilot, military pilot was involved in the Black Hawk Down incident, if I recall right. Has also been running a very, very Trumpy campaign, but has been also endorsed and supported by more moderate or establishment Republicans. In his announcement of rescinding the endorsement, Trump declared that Mo Brooks had become woke. And his crime that made him woke was not wanting to overturn the 2024 election by declaring Trump president and then appointing him to office, which is
illegal.
For once, illegal, very, very illegal, something that cannot be done. Even Mo Brooks would acknowledge that you cannot do this, and apparently that's correct. I saw someone make a comment fairly recently, which is that people who went on that many people like Brooks who jumped onto the Trump train have since been thrown in front of the train and tied to the train tracks. That's pretty much what happened with Mo Brooks here. Part of this, of course, is his campaign being just inept. He has really no message other than that he is endorsed by President Trump. His Twitter banner, sadly, has gone from endorsed by Trump, and then his Twitter handle, Mo Brooks, endorsed by President Trump, to just Mo Brooks. This Mr. Krabs violin gift right there. That's really, really tragic. Trump has not declared who he will endorse. He's met with Durant, and people like Bill Belichick have been pushing him to consider Katie Britt. Trump is known to listen to what Bill Belichick says. I'm not making this up. This is a serious, legitimate thing that happened.
That's
apparently, the impetus for him
surprising.
apparently the impetus for him even considering Katie Britt was that Bill Belichick spoke very, very highly of her. So
anyone who's surprised by this didn't watch Trump for 4 years.
This is very true.
Yes, but between these two candidates, Mike Durant is far older. He also has a scandal involving his family scandal. I won't go into the details because it's pretty touchy. I don't want to get into any sort of liability, but it involves sexual assault within the family, allegations between his sister, and his father, and then who he sided with in that incident is what his sister has said. In comparison, Katie Britt is running a very, very Richard Shelby campaign. Her message is that basically she'll be in the Senate for 40 to 50 years and can deliver as much for Alabama in that time frame as possible. That is basically what Richard Shelby did for most of his tenure, was focus fairly heavily on bringing investment and bringing infrastructure and things back to Alabama. It's a very old school sort of senator. Durant would probably be someone who's in the Senate for 1, 2, maybe 3 terms. Britt is someone who could genuinely be there until she dies, and because she's quite young, she will not be dying for quite a long time. This is someone who could potentially serve 8 Senate terms. In all likelihood, it's very, very possible that someone like her could do that. So I'll go ahead and throw it to the panel here to kind of discuss, what do you make of this? Who do you of these other 2 candidates see as the favorite? Do you think Mo Brooks drops out? Is there any way he can salvage his campaign at this point? Basically, what do you think what do you make of this, and how do you see things going forward in this very, very interesting Republican primary?
No, Mo Brooks cannot salvage it. If he couldn't salvage it with the Trump endorsement, he can't salvage it without. I don't think he drops out. I don't think his pride lets him drop out. I honestly, though, I do see him maybe getting into the single digits of support at this point. Yeah, Katie Britt's, I think, the favorite for all the reasons you said, and just she's going to get the Trump endorsement. She will. I have very little doubt. I do think this is the first time everybody's cried wolf about, oh, Trump's influence is waning. I don't think that's ever been true. I think if it were ever going to be true, though, it would be now. He just rescinded his endorsement of, granted, somebody who ran an incompetent campaign, but nobody could take away that Mo Brooks was a loyalist. Mm-hmm. So if you want to say the Trump endorsement has now lost some of its effect because people know it can just be taken away if you slight him, yeah, I wouldn't argue that. This is the first genuine loss of influence I think Trump could experience.
Mm-hmm. And I know I had been saying this for a while. I'll go ahead and throw it to Joe here in a second, but I think I said this right at the time Trump started making these questionable endorsements of backbencher loyalists from the Freedom Caucus, that Trump was endorsing these people way too early. We're seeing a similar thing in North Carolina with Ted Budd. The Budd campaign has just not taken off. The Club for Growth is spending a lot of money on him. They've actually cut their ad budget they literally cut their ad budget for Ted Budd since the endorsement withdrawal in Alabama, probably because they're a little bit concerned about Budd's future. Like in Alabama, Trump did not talk to anyone in North Carolina about endorsing Ted Budd. He didn't consult with the party. He didn't really do his homework for this candidacy. And now, it's been months since that endorsement, and Pat McCrory still has a polling lead, and a pretty substantial polling lead. And on top of that, you're seeing a Mark Walker. I would say a Mark Walker comeback, but he's certainly still a factor in the race, and people kind of expected him to fade out.
Wait, didn't Mark Walker drop out?
Nope, he's still in.
He's still in there.
Yep. He refused to drop out. He has been stubbornly campaigning, and when I say stubbornly campaigning, I mean he's actually campaigning. He's going to debates. He's going to local party meetings.
I could have
If
swore we
yeah.
talked about him dropping out.
it was considered heavily likely that he would drop out to run in the 6th district when that was redrawn. But obviously that didn't happen. And also he's been pretty clear that he thought the agreement. He said actually recently he had an agreement with Bud that Bud would stay in the House and he'd run for Senate. I'm not going to say I think Mark Walker wins, but I can say is he is running a far more serious campaign than Bud. Like actually going to party meetings. I know Joe could talk about similar thing going on in Pennsylvania with Dr. Oz and his candidacy of basically being unusual. But that's something similar we're seeing in North Carolina. We're seeing it in other states, other areas. His chosen candidates have been endorsed too early and lack the real quality control that he did earlier, which is to endorse the person who was going to win the primary. They didn't always win. The Luther Strange situation in Alabama is a pretty good example of that. But usually they did win. And he took credit afterwards. He can't take credit for this endorsement at this point. It's pretty clearly a disaster.
Well, I think the really interesting part is he's endorsed these backbencher loyalists, but hasn't endorsed anyone in Ohio, where his endorsement could genuinely make a difference.
Yeah. Hasn't endorsed in Pennsylvania either. Another state where it could matter.
Well, he did endorse in Pennsylvania. Sean Parnell dropped out.
Oh, yeah. Fair point.
Yeah, I do expect Trump to endorse Dr. Oz, unironically. Unironically, I think that's going to happen. And
that would be interesting. You could start seeing ads for you could start seeing Trump. I know Joe has talked on Twitter about how the bizarre situation of Dr. Oz literally having ad breaks during his campaign rallies.
He has ad breaks during his campaign rallies. He speaks for 20 minutes and then he stops and he plays ads and he calls them commercial breaks. This is not a
Do you not love
campaign
that?
rally.
Do you not
maybe
love
it
that,
works,
though?
but God.
As a capitalist, I highly respect that. I really respect the hustle.
No, I mean, honestly, Dr. Oz is running the campaign Trump was in 2016. He's running the I just want a better TV deal campaign.
But,
anyways,
but again,
Mo Brooks,
you
cannot tell me that this is not the funniest thing that happened this week. It is for absolutely the dumbest reason imaginable that somehow Mo Brooks, one of like 5 congressmen who sold their soul on the line with the election fraud and the January 6th nonsense and basically put their soul on the line for this man, is now suddenly too woke for Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. You cannot tell me that not only is that stupid, but how highly funny that is. That is the funniest thing we have had in at least a month.
It couldn't have happened to a worse human being.
It is funny. It is funny because who knew that a guy who I have talked about this relentlessly, that a man from Huntsville, one of the weakest parts you could be for a Republican primary in Alabama, was going to do bad. A man who had a prior history of doing bad in statewide primaries was going to do bad. And look, we can talk about the influence of the Trump endorsement as much as we can. But what this shows categorically is that the Trump endorsement is not the be-all, end-all for these primaries. It is not the be-all, end-all in most of these primaries.
Allow me to play devil's advocate because Mo Brooks did not do well in the 2017 special election primary, as Eric said. He came in 3rd place, lost out to Luther Strange and Roy Moore. The Trump endorsement is the only reason he had a chance. Being from a weaker part of the state, running a campaign solely on the Trump name, having a history of underperforming. The Trump endorsement is the only reason that man had a prayer of winning that primary. And he would have if he ran a half-decent campaign that wasn't solely, hi, I'm endorsed by Trump. Oh, by the way, my name is Mo Brooks.
Mm-hmm. And keep in mind, this is not the first time. That was not the first time that he had finished 3rd statewide. He ran for lieutenant governor in 2006, where he finished 3rd behind Luther Strange and George Wallace Jr. Yes, that was a politician who held the office in Alabama.
You don't know how happy that makes me. I never knew that.
Yeah, it's like at some point it's kind of a trend. It's Mo Brooks and finishing third in Alabama statewide primaries. There aren't a whole lot more iconic duos in Alabama politics than that, aside from I guess George Wallace and Segregation. I mean, like there's really not a whole lot more you can look at in recent history that's like something that's really pretty clear. What really surprised me about this though is specifically the calling him woke. Mo Brooks is someone who supported deporting all illegal immigrants. He voted against making Juneteenth a federal holiday. There are people I would call woke. Mo Brooks is not one of them.
Well, this proves that the word woke has no meaning.
Yes.
Yeah.
The word woke has absolutely no meaning. Nobody who says woke actually knows what it is. It just means guy I don't like.
Yes, correct. Guy I don't like. I mean, and he doesn't like him because Mo Brooks, to his credit, to the words I never thought I would say. It's like the Onion, the worst person in the world picture. He has a point. It's like, yeah, you can't just depose Joe Biden, declare Trump president, and then have a special presidential election. Like you can't do that. That's actually something you cannot do.
How insane do you have to be to make Mo Brooks go, no, wait a second?
I'm trying to think of an equivalent here on the Democratic side, and I really can't. I'm really struggling to think of something where you had a bunch of like a really left-wing Democrat and something a Democratic president did, and they were like, you know what? I really don't think we can do this. There's just like
you can't think of one. Our representatives have always been to the left of our president.
It's absolutely wild. I would not have in my life put the words Mo Brooks and woke in the same sentence, and yet here it is, and that was dominating the news cycle. Mo Brooks had to put out a statement saying that he is not a woke liberal, to which I would reply that is exactly what I would expect a woke liberal to say.
So, okay, half serious, half joking question. Is that statement his I am not a witch?
Yeah, honestly, it's pretty close. That's a pretty
good callback, Dylan. Good history lesson.
That's
Thank you.
In terms of comparisons, that's pretty close. That is a pretty close comparison.
I think Alabama Republicans would rather elect a witch than a woke liberal.
Pretty much. I mean, again, they almost elected Roy Moore to the Senate. It was pretty close. That was a pretty close election.
Honestly, closer than I expected. I did not expect Doug Jones to win.
And to be fair, he did win. When New Jersey had the whole Bob Menendez stuff going around, Bob Menendez still won.
Yes. New Jersey loves our corrupt Democrats.
Hooray for Bob.
Our corrupt Republicans too. We just like corruption.
Yeah. Just
Viva
in general.
Chicago and Viva New Jersey.
Yeah.
Viva Philadelphia. They want to attack
Ukraine.
Well,
yeah. But that's the Alabama. The most amusing story of the week, certainly the one I think that got a lot of attraction. One other element this actually has really impacted is that Mo Brooks has been specifically very angry about this because he has blamed Trump's unendorsement of him on Mitch McConnell. He's declared that this is because of Mitch McConnell, that he was the only candidate in the race that was going to vote against Mitch McConnell for Senate Majority Leader, which I will point out does not matter. The Majority Leader is elected by a majority vote in the caucus. It's not elected by a majority vote of all senators. So really wouldn't even be an impact anyway. You're not going to get 25 Republicans to vote against Mitch because you would have 25 new residents at the bottom of the Potomac River at that point. But like he's blaming it on that. Really, though, this is just kind of inevitable. I think we kind of been seeing the sharks in the water for a little bit here. That this wasn't tenable. That not only was Mo Brooks not going to win, but that there was serious risk to the future of his candidacy. So again, we've continued covering this. We do think this is a two-person race now between Britt, Katie Boyd Britt, and Mike Durant. That's going to be really interesting to watch because that is a pretty strong conflict in terms of two candidacies, two different types of candidacies, and two different types of candidates there. Both certainly more than the normal spectrum of what a Republican elected official is typically like, though. So we'll be going on to our next topic, which is substantially less fun. Over the weekend, Don Young, a representative from Alaska, longtime representative from Alaska, was one of, I believe, only two representatives in the history of Alaska died at very, very old age. I believe he was well into his hundreds.
87?
80. He was in
87,
his 80s.
87. Yeah, 87. So he was in his 80s. People thought he could serve until his hundreds. He's generally become a meme, kind of a folk hero in Alaska, very much an old school Republican politician from that sort of state, very focused on local issues, on infrastructure. One of the House's most pork-friendly politicians. Someone who's been mentioned probably on quite a few of the most corrupt politicians list, but also someone who's just generally beloved by everyone because he got things done for Alaska. So this is the end of an era in Alaska. Don Young had taken over after the passing of a former representative. I believe there was Representative
Begich.
Nick Begich, who died in a plane crash. He was able to win that in 1972, which is just a long time ago. Probably the oldest Republican who can remember Watergate at this point. There's not a whole lot of Republicans left who were elected in 1972. Don Young is one of them. Someone who's been around for such a very, very long time. Obviously, he's going to be missed by his family and the people of Alaska, who generally liked him and reelected him for a very, very long period of time. But what this does do is it opens up a new special election for the vacant House seat. Alaska is not a competitive state politically. Trump won it by about 10 points, which is a low threshold for Republicans in Alaska, but the Senate race was less competitive. Republicans do have a majority in both chambers of the legislature, although there's a coalition in charge of the House, much to the chagrin of pretty much every other elected Republican in the House, Republican governor. The most interesting thing about this primary is that it will be done using Alaska's new top 4 primary system, which I absolutely loathe on virtually every level. I really dislike the system. I'm hoping, I'm not hoping, I'm expecting it to be unfortunate. I'm expecting it to be not the most ideal, be the most ideal race. But what the special election will do is it will happen on August 16th. That's the general election. The special primary will be held on June 11th. Basically, all of the candidates will be on one giant ballot. The 4 of them who get the most votes will go into the general, and then that general will be decided by ranked choice voting. Alaska is a state that uses mail voting and takes a long time to count their votes. So do not expect the winner to be known on election night. That's just to give you that expectation right up front. It could be a week or 2 until we know who wins this race.
We also won't be covering it. We're just saying that now because polls close in Alaska at 1 a.m. Eastern time.
Yeah.
And none of us are particularly interested.
Yeah.
In,
and
up
again,
at that time.
It will not be known on election night. It will probably not be known within a week of election night. It may very well not be known within 2 weeks of election night. This is just Alaska in general. There's a lot of rural areas that vote by mail. It takes a long time for these votes to come in and a long time for them to be counted in close elections. It is not unusual for close races in Alaska to take weeks to figure out the winner. And that's not me slamming their electoral system. It is a very, very big state. Voting is quite challenging. It has a lot of remote native communities that do vote almost exclusively by mail. And it takes a long time to get those votes, and it will take longer to count them with ranked choice voting. So don't expect to know that overnight. Early candidates who have declared themselves include Nick Begich III, who is a Republican. Interestingly enough, I believe he's one of the few Begiches who is a Republican. He's the grandson of the former Representative Nick Begich, who died in that plane crash that I mentioned. They never actually found his body. He disappeared. They never found the plane, but he's presumed dead for all considered reasons. He's one of the few Republicans. Al Gross is running again as an independent. I'm sleeping on his candidacy as usual. We slept on it in 2020. That was a wise decision. We're going to sleep on it again. A couple others who have expressed interest include Sarah Palin, the former governor of Alaska, vice presidential nominee, political gadfly.
Maximum chaos.
Reality TV star, foreign policy expert. Anything else you can add? She's considering running publicly. What this top 4 does mean, and I've written an article about the top 4 system in Alaska, is if you look historically at elections in Alaska, and I'm going to go a little bit longer than usual here. I don't want to dominate the discussion, but I know quite a bit about Alaska. If you go back and look at previous primary results, I would not be surprised if the top 3 candidates here are if 3 of the 4 candidates that get in are Republicans. If you look at how primaries vote in Alaska, have voted in Alaska in most of the recent elections, the top 3 of the top 4 vote getters have been Republicans in virtually every election I can look at. That fourth slot, that could change because obviously you have Al Gross running as an independent, not a Democrat. This is something that's happened in Alaska before. You had Elise Galvin do this in 2018 and 2020. And she performed respectable margins. I actually wouldn't be shocked if she decides to run again, given she did pull, relatively close in, I think, 2020. But because of this, I would not be surprised if 2 or 3 of these candidates here are Republicans, which would set up an interesting scenario where you have 1 Democrat and then you have 3 Republicans. And if you think this is going to help the Democrats, no, it's not. No, that's actually really bad because that means Republicans are going to be jockeying themselves over voting. And it means Republican voters may well be more likely to turn out because all of their preferred nominees will be on the ballot. And because it's ranked choice voting, all of those votes will transfer upwards towards the top Republican vote getter. I know Democrats have been pretty excited about the system because they thought they could win statewide. I would ask you to look at the last time a Democrat has won a majority of the vote statewide in Alaska. It's been quite a while. Usually when Democrats win in Alaska, it's with a plurality of the vote. They literally cannot win a plurality of the vote in Alaska anymore because of the ranked choice voting system. That path to victory, the only path to victory they've had, is shut off. So I have no idea who could win here. I do know that I think the system will favor more moderate Republicans because there will be multiple on the ballot. One of them is likely to be more moderate, and one of them could potentially get more rankings from Democrats. That's a potential possibility. But what do you guys think here? What do you think of Don Young's political career? And how do you think this next Republican, in all likelihood, because I think we'll be keeping this race in all likelihood at safe Republican. That seems to be, we had, I believe, the actual race at safe Republican. I don't anticipate that changing. How do you see things going forward in this race?
Yeah, I do think the most interesting aspect will be seeing what Republicans run. But before I want to get into that, Don Young is the last individual we will ever have who experienced, or at least from in the near future likely, who is someone who experienced his state going through the statehood process. Mm-hmm. He was I believe the last, unless there is someone of his age in Alaska or Hawaii elected. I believe he was the last elected official from either of those 2 states who was alive and very much active during those states' statehood process. That is a piece of history that is sad to lose. I know the congressman from stories, and from people I've heard, that he had a great respect for the history of the state of Alaska. I visited Alaska in the summertime. It is a beautiful state. And I think it is unquestionable that he loved it, that he fought for it every day in his life. And that is a hard thing for any body of government to lose. So he will certainly be missing the halls of Congress as a maverick and as a type of politician that we don't have a whole lot of anymore. Mm-hmm. But I think going into this race now, Don, I think that it's going to be so fascinating to see what types of Republicans can we run. Because I think you're absolutely right, Eric, that especially I think for what this race is likely to be, the state house race, this does not help Democrats or Democratic aligned independents like Al Gross. This does not help you in most regards, I don't think. This is a type of place where really, if you look at the candidates, people will argue that Nick Begich III is some lunatic. He doesn't necessarily feel like a lunatic, but I think, you've got Sarah Palin, who I think to a lot of us is probably someone who does not, necessarily fail to, I guess, much as I hate to say it, really make a lot of sense to a lot of the analyst group. But this is still someone who has won elections in Alaska before, and to be fair, has someone who still has the respect of a good many Alaskans in what is still a Republican state. This is what's going to be interesting to seeing, where this is going to go, what types of Republican runs. Now that we have this open field, do any actual Democrats run? I know Al Gross's star has certainly waned since that 2020 race. His star has certainly waned a good bit. Does Elise Galvin run? That'll be very, very interesting to see if she decides to hop in, even now after being beaten twice now, which is, that's never something that's easy to come back from. So it's really interesting to see, I think, what type of Republicans are on here. I agree that it's going to be a safe Republican seat for sure. It's very hard. I think, I don't know if any polling's been done, but I believe Biden's relatively unpopular in Alaska. I would say probably similar to the state of Texas in range of unpopularity, similar ties to the oil industry for sure. But it's a weird state, Alaska. It's been a weird state politically. It has some interesting factions. But this is gonna be really interesting to kind of see where Young goes here for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I joke about it, but I do think the most likely candidate is probably Sarah Palin. She has the name recognition. She would certainly have the money. I imagine she'd have the Trump endorsement for whatever that's worth. No, there's no chance of Al Gross though. We can sleep on that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know Alaska politics, so I don't really know anybody else. Maybe what's the candidate's name who's primarying Lisa Murkowski?
Kelly Szymanski.
She's got the Trump endorsement there. I don't think she's gonna drop that.
No. Maybe if we found out that race was doomed, but I don't think it's doomed yet.
Yeah, and this will be a big Republican primary. I mean, this effectively is a Republican primary on the whole.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know which Democrats will run. Alaska, despite having some Democrats in the legislature, does not have a really strong Democratic bench. That's pretty to the indication that they chose to run independent labeled candidates in 2020 over actual Democrats. That's not a good sign. Well, that's a pretty clever electoral strategy. That's really not a good sign for the state of your party. I will mention one thing here in particular, which I do think the next Republican will be a little bit different on. Don Young, if you look at the races, if you look at how people performed, Don Young was by far the best Republican performer in the state among Native voters. He had a really strong connection with the Native communities. If you compare basically his performance with where he won by a smaller margin than Dan Sullivan did in his Senate bid, he actually won quite a few of those Native areas outright that Sullivan lost, that Trump lost, while performing worse around the Anchorage area, which obviously has a larger portion of the state, Anchorage and Matsu, and the general more inland portion that's closer to Canada. The mainland of Canada and the Juneau Peninsula. So it's going to be interesting to see how the next Republican approaches Native issues. Contrary to popular belief, Republicans actually do try to reach out to Native voters in Alaska. It's not. It's just a matter of having support in that community is pretty vital, and they do have voters out in that region. But no one was better at appealing to them than Don Young. And there's something to say about going from Alaska having the dean of the House to going from someone who's going to be dead last in seniority, at least until the new representatives are pulled in. That's a pretty substantial loss in influence for the state, especially when you only have one representative. There's only one representative, and for a long time it's been really good for that representative for Alaska to be Don Young, just from a strategic perspective, from earmarks, from all sorts of things. That's something that cannot be brought back. But on that note, we'll go ahead and close off for this week. Thank you guys for watching as usual. We'll be back next week, back on our usual schedule. To bring you more political news is what comes in, updates. There's not any. What?
I just want to mention quick on Galvin. She's already declined apparently for the main race because she's planning a run for either body of the state legislature in Alaska.
All right. So if she's running for legislature, that probably means she's not really too interested in running for House again, which is understandable. It is a very, very big state to campaign in. Very, very big, very expensive, very challenging. But again, thank you guys for listening. You can find me on Twitter at @Cunningham2. You can also find, if you're watching on video, you can find the names of our other panelists here, Joe Szymanski and Dylan here. Their handles are on Twitter. I would normally have them read out, but we got to go in a little bit of a hurry here. You can find us on Twitter at elections_daily and elections-daily.com. Articles, tools, news updates, podcasts, all sorts of things, wherever you're listening to this on. Whether it's on Twitter, on YouTube, or on our podcast platforms, thank you. Be sure to like and subscribe if you appreciate our content. It helps us grow and helps us expand in our audience and and be able to bring political news and coverage to more people. So thank you guys for watching. We'll be back next week for next week's edition of Elections Weekly. Thanks.